So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find a layer of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. So then, as we study these holy documents, we then evaluate very precisely every aspect of the holy instructions related with the autumn feast. At the moment, there is a beyond the autumn feast known as post-autumn feast, where then Yeshayahu the prophet, Ezekiel, and other prophets have at some point mentioned what it means after this age. At the moment, we find then the events of this year. Very interestingly, you find then the Soviet Union very active. You find India very active. China is the first. And then we begin our evaluation then obviously with Daniel the 11th chapter. Daniel was not only a prophet. The prophet of the holy instructions is related with pointing the people back, so then they would obviously obey the words of the Creator. But then the prophet Daniel was then a person, a tradesperson, a statesperson, we might say it, even a politician, where then on behalf of the Gentiles he spoke many words, and he then experienced at his time many of the events of the time of the end, because he was under many kings and he was extremely important, extremely influential. And we are then studying the holy instructions for what they are. They are very simple understanding, they are not complicated. What is complicated is the sin in the lives of the people, and obviously the lack of tabernacling at the moment, but they are coming. Then the first city we understand is on the land of Cush, northern Sudan, where then Yohanan the prophet, and he was also a Shilishim or Shaliach, depending how you understand your language, because in a holy language Shilishim is plural. So then Yohanan is obviously Shaliach. But if you want to understand in English, then would be singular rather than plural, because you understand many as Yohanan and then John. If you understand John as another person and Yohanan is another person, then becomes plural. But then, as we can understand, Yohanan is John, so we should understand as Shaliach, or then a person related with being a disciple. Though he was a disciple, he was also a prophet. Let's understand then in Revelation what the angel said regarding then Yohanan when he left then after 36 months he was in the first holy city on the land of Cush. Then when he came out of it, the angel had mentioned to do and say many words. He said, you have yet prophesied, and finish up his objective. So then, as we study the holy instructions today, we're going to evaluate then what it means then the combat of the end. As we understand at the moment the Soviets they hold yet, and at this moment they have held this title of the largest bomb exploded ever. In the 60s they have exploded the Tsar bomb, 50 megatons of power, and they are very famous worldwide regarding then this technology. Where do we understand then, as far as Zechariah the 5th chapter, we find then there are a couple of galals from the Hebrew, from the Holy Hebrew. Galal is simply a tube. If they have holy writings, they are Megillas. So then, one of them is 10, the other 20 cubits. Some say, the bombs are not very big. We have to understand the technology at that time. We had to have roughly 20 years left, give or take a couple of years maximum. Then the technology in the future is going to be as such where then these bombs, though not very big in size, we evaluate the technology involved then by then. So then, let's try to understand what this is going to cause in the future. As we understand United States and Israel, Gog and Magog, these couple of nations are the troublemakers at the moment, because they don't understand what it means then the linker, the computer linker, so then the time of the end then can be established as then the new BRICS system is then launched. Let's try to understand then why these nations are so troublesome. Firstly, the last couple of 100 years of the 1000 was granted then to USA. The first beast was granted then, as far as we can understand from the holy instructions given to Great Britain, and they have then managed the world for 800, in the United States for a couple of 100. The time is for China. In fact, if we read then Daniel the 10th chapter, you find then the prophet was then fasting. He was constantly in prayer because he wanted the revelation of the nations of the end regarding then the statue of the 2nd chapter. Daniel saw while he was resting, he saw then a video, you might say. It was not a vision. Visions are only granted in a holy city or in a holy cities. It's a direct link with the heaven. No person outside of the holy cities can have visions. Only dreams, and they must be interpreted. So then, let's try to understand then this situation, because Gog and Magog is precisely then what Ezekiel also had mentioned, Yeshayahu has mentioned, and then we find these also in Zechariah, the 5th chapter. What do we understand of Arabia? What do we understand of China? What do we understand of USA or then Israel and a couple of bombs? It's very simple. We have to relate then a couple of situations simultaneously walking along each other. You find Gog Magog, you find a bomb of 10, the other 20. You find in Arabia, you find China. So then the experts and the Americans have then exploded also atomic bombs, and a particular scientist, an expert also in bombs, and he had much knowledge regarding it, and he determined 100 megatons or above can destroy the atmosphere of the earth. This is absolutely true. Then we find ourselves then studying that Tsar bomb was half of this power. When we read then Revelation, we understand then the atmosphere of the earth being burned, and then obviously the vengeance then started. It's going to be 490 days of pure inferno in this earth. Not truly at the very end of it when the shout of sulfur comes, but these 490 days is going to be pure inferno in this earth until the end. So then, as we understand the technology, there are bombs already with this capability. Though the size and the height of them, they are not very big, but the technology behind is extremely important. Let's try to understand then what it means the United States involving themselves and then what's going to take place. The situation is not complicated. In fact, it's extremely simple. And the simplicity comes from the Messiah himself. He was not a complicated person. He was very direct. But he was very stern regarding then the cleaning of the holy instructions. If you are trying then to twist the holy instructions to get rich, boy, he would have laid it down very fast. Because the Messiah could not, under any condition, put up with people speaking words and twistings to get them personal gain. He would lay it down real fast and extremely strong. So then, the simplicity of the Messiah and the holy instructions as we layer them properly, because the Messiah never said every word of the holy instruction is going to be completed. He said every layer of the holy instruction must be then completed. Because we are speaking of Moadim, or the holy feasts, or then the shadow prophetic events of the Torah or the instructions, where then at some point then the people of the Messiah, they are going to form holy cities as they were during the time of his reign. From roughly 100 years after his ascension, as we understand the Messiah, after he came from the dead, he spent 12 months, a whole year, with his people, teaching them step by step, moad by moad. Thus then Moadim. So people had no excuse of saying, oh, we didn't understand this point because there was this feast, was never explained, and then the Messiah came to complete, then we did not know what to do in the holy cities. None of it. Yohanan went precisely then on northern Sudan, because when the Messiah was in the earth, there was extremely we can ever imagine such a heavens open as far as we understand as prosperity. Then the Messiah was able to control via then what was going on during the time. When we read then these, we understand the Messiah was not trying to take control of the whole area. He simply let then the heavens then come down with the rain, lots of harvest going on around, extremely profitable. And what the Messiah had said was taking place for the benefit of the people as far as what they wanted as prosperity. After came the time, then the Messiah began to lay it down real heavy. He began to explain in the time of the end. He began to explain the post-autumn feast. Precisely during his time, then he began the explaining of the holy instructions. So then when you read Yeshayahu, the 24th chapter, you are not reading during the time of the spring feast. You are reading after. The spring feast was completed. He gave his life. And then what went on, he then explained the rest of the holy instructions as precisely as the time was given to him. Then when completed a year, then the Messiah simply departed. Let's understand then what it means then the time of the end. The Messiah was very precise. The most complete era of this planet as far as the Creator is concerned was during the time of the Messiah in every aspect. The Messiah provided a perfect place in this earth while then he was teaching them during those 12 months. There was sin. Absolutely there was. And a lot of it. But what Messiah had done for the people during the time of the 12 months, there was no reason for sin. Try to understand the distinction. So then, we find the time of the end, the combat of the end. As we read it then in Breaks Post, came out yesterday, We find ourselves then studying it very importantly because the Soviet Union is going to help then Brazil come out of this mire of economic disaster. The last quarter was minus 0.5%. Brazil is absolutely, in quotes, sunk, with the incompetent government and politicians not knowing what to do. They are squandering the country. And unfortunately, Brazil does not know how to be rich. So then, as far as the Soviet Union, we understand, per the instructions, as far as the Kingdom of the North, they are strictly military. There is no other reason. It does not mean that the Soviet Union won't do any other trade besides. But the focus point of the importance of the Soviet Union is purely military. China is the whole in itself. China can do military, China can do trade, and any other factor. Because China leads. China is the kingdom of the East. Precisely when you read Daniel the 11th chapter, you find China is the leader. The 10th chapter of Daniel is precisely China. But then the Soviet Union is purely military. So what's going on? What can we understand as far as the military? China is very involved with the trade. The whole trade of this world must be in the hands of China. Going around the world, making deals, closing deals. China is strictly trade at the moment, where then they can give the Soviets then the light, or then the understanding, or giving them the leadership then to take the military leadership of the entire system. Africa, however, is the southern kingdom where you find then the raw materials or the rare materials, and then kingdom of the south is where then tabernacling is at. Most importantly, Africa is then part of these elite nations because obviously tabernacling. Northern Sudan, then the land of Cush, is the first holy city. Is precisely where then Yohanan was at. Why do we find then Yohanan on the land of Cush? When the Messiah then, he began a bit prior of his ascension, he began to read the whole instructions for what they were. People were for so very long, they were so rich during his time, that they began to enjoy this age, and the Messiah was not involved with this age, though he did extend his hand of prosperity during his time, because he was the completion of the holy instructions, and the whole was included in him. But then people began to forget. It's quite amazing when people, they get comfortable, then they begin to take advantage of, and they are not as grateful as they used to be. Then was the time for the combat of the end, and the Messiah then began to explain what's going to take place. He began to explain then they must come up with a holy city, and people mocked him. They did. There was no holy city during his time. There was pure prosperity. But then prior of his ascension, he began then to teach the people, and then he began to explain what the prophets had said. Then when he ascended came the persecution. It was extremely severe, because the people, they were so prosperous, they couldn't understand why this world was then ending if they had everything they wanted. So the persecution was so severe. The area of Shaliach Shaul then later, where we understand as Asia Minor, those people had to come out of there real fast. So then Yohanan went south. He ended up on the land of Cush. That's where he was at for 36 months. Shaliach Shaul, however, he began then the understanding of then gathering and then making sure his people would then understand the giving of Ruach HaKodesh and then the functions. He was gathering the people for the holy cities. Then we find ourselves studying more. But the same situation as during the time of the Messiah, people have this evil in them. When they hear the words of the holy instructions, something in them, they begin to pride themselves in their own works. They watch themselves, what they do, they begin to be so prideful of themselves, and they don't believe this world is going to end. If we take a walk over there in the cities of the plain, Sodom for instance, you find many pieces of rocks over there. Those are tiny stones of pure sulfur. If you observe then the hole that the Tsar bomb had generated under its blasting point, it was a huge hole over there where rocks became dust. If you understand the heat under the bomb when exploded a couple thousand miles above, you can imagine what the shower of sulfur can do to the earth. It's not very nice. And it's precisely what's coming. So when Shaliach Shimon had said that every element of the earth is going then to burn, he was not joking. The heat that comes from heaven is far worse than what's coming from the bombs. But people are evil by nature. They are so reliable upon themselves, and they can't understand why then this world is going to end. Prior of the time of the combat, we find then the nations gathering themselves and try to come up with ideas to maintain themselves in power. And the Messiah already gave the answers. The freighters are in charge. They simply don't know it yet. Some of them do, some of them don't. And the politicians have their days already counted. A vast majority of politicians in every nation, they are going to be obviously refused. They're going to be laid to waste because the computer is going to do their jobs. Obviously you have to have education, you have to have health, you have to have the services of a normal country. But inflating the countries with incompetent politicians, those people are going to be absolutely out of there very fast. Another 24, 25 months, we understand the new system will come. The Creator has His ways of doing His work, and He does it perfectly. So then, politicians, they are so secure. No, they talk what they want. They have big houses. They have big mansions. They have farms. And they are so secure, and someday, overnight, the world will change. With it comes also the inconspicuous ways the world is going to end. Why ways? Because the bombs, when they are exploded, then during their time, the earth will end. 490 days of pure inferno, of people going to and fro. Disastrous. So then, as we read the 490 days, then we do understand at the very end, when the Messiah then gather his people, then at the precise moment when the Messiah gathers them, then comes the shout of sulfur, pure destruction. Then the whole planet is going to be a circle of fire. Nobody's going to survive. And the people trying to go to another planet, it won't work. The Creator won't let. So those people trying to come up with some spacecraft to try to go to Mars, you know, the other planet over there, there is a special name in Hebrew, because Mars is a pagan name. So if they think they can build a spacecraft to send people over there, it won't work. They will get lost on their way. It won't work. What the Creator has established remains. So then, since we are on this planet and there is no way out of it, the best way is for us to listen what the Messiah is saying. Because Moshe said, when he comes, listen. The Messiah is wise. And every person, including myself, sometimes we do things that we shouldn't do. We shouldn't have done it. Apart from sexual sin, there are others that we should abstain ourselves from. The more we read the holy instructions, the more we understand. So then, what can we understand of Gog and Magog? There is a special technology exchange from US and Israel. When we read then Daniel the 11th chapter, we find ourselves then studying it, and then at some point Israel is going to try then to come up with a third temple, and it won't be built. The Messiah said, as far as we can understand, there won't be a stone upon another. As far as their desire of control based upon their own works, as far as a building is concerned, it won't be built. What the Arabs may let them is at some point, a limited friendship where then the first and second sons then become friends. Not the whole nation, and not the nations are going to be at peace. Not truly speaking of war at the moment, but harmony, speaking of harmony. Ezekiel 37th chapter, the granting of the stick of authority of the Ishmaelites and the Israelites. There always are going to be tensions amongst those people. Some of them will understand, some of them won't. As we understand, because of the technology at that time, Israel will launch a bomb on Arabia. The United States will release a bomb on China. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. So let's be prepared for it. Why do we determine Gog and Magog, US and Israel? It's very simple. Read it Daniel the 11th chapter. US is the last beast. However, when we read then Revelation, we are not speaking of a beast as the beast itself. We are not speaking of a beast but devil, or then slanderer, or then deceiver. We are speaking of the 1,000 years of deceit. It is the beast, the facet of deceit. Because we don't understand the facets the same way the Creator has His facets. As we understand, He has many names regarding senses. As Shaliach Shaul said, exercise your senses. So as Nahashatan has his own facets. And then the last beast was then USA, United States. So then, the friendship of the US and Israel, we understand firstly, US wants then the deceit to continue, and then we find then in Daniel, very important point of Daniel is speaking the devastation that makes desolate. There is a point where then Daniel mentions then the desecration, the destruction of the understanding of tabernacling. What does it mean? It means the third temple. Means the returning of sacrifices. An abomination beyond measure. It is a sin beyond imagination. What those Hebrews are doing, they are saying what the Messiah has done wasn't enough. Not only this, but they put themselves beyond the Messiah in re-establishing what was then put to rest. An abomination that makes desolate. This is what then the unsaved Hebrews want from the third temple. It is abomination. The Creator has nothing to do with it. And the third temple won't be built. So then, the combat of the end. As we can understand, those bombs, one of them is going to be upon Arabia, releasing then the petroleum into the sea. If you read then the instructions, you find Revelation, then the third part of the ocean then contaminated. I only have a kind of a dear care for Australia because they are in the very south of the third part of the oceans, where then they're going to be contaminated. If you understand the map, then you understand Australia is nearly directly south of the whole works. And some say, oh, then the petroleum of Arabia is going to run out. No, read the instructions. We have yet roughly 20 years of usage of petroleum, including then the time of the end, the trade of the end. You have then the autumn feast, and there is enough petroleum in that area yet to contaminate the third part of the oceans. It is a lot of petroleum. So the Arabs will control the fuel. Thus then, when they do, not because they're going to control the people, it's because the freighters of the earth must be in line with them so they can receive then fuel. As we read the instructions, we are then becoming more aware of the layering of these understandings. Be sure of it. the Messiah said, don't be then yourself caught with them. Whatsoever you can understand and imagine in your mind of wisdom, in every way that you can think of, the Messiah spoke. We don't find every section of it in the 4 recordings of the spring feast mixed up with his 12 months of teachings after he came from the dead. But these understandings at the moment, they are mixed up. Every time you can think of the instructions with wisdom of those layers, the Messiah already spoke of them. There is absolutely nothing else we can say that can improve the holy instructions, neither we can take from it. So, on YouTube you find in a very interesting videos, is extremely important and very educational, open media. You can find then the Tsar bomb, released in the 60s. 50 megatons of power. The new bombs, they're going to be far more powerful. There are a few considerations we could establish. Firstly, we find in the 10 cubits bomb obviously opens a hole in the earth, so then gushes out petroleum into the sea. But the second bomb, because China leads the trade of this world, you can understand the second bomb, because Zechariah mentions 10 cubits and 20 cubits. He gives us then the consideration of a releasing of a bomb and the releasing of the other bomb. Israel and US, they are very related, and they exchange technology very often. And as we can understand, Gog and Magog are going to be synchronized as per Ezekiel the 1st chapter. This particular year, Mr. Xi and Mr. Kabila are going to close a deal in Congo. Thus, then we shift from Daniel 11:4 to a Daniel 11:5. And we continue on with our quest. And later then, we're going to talk regarding post-autumn feast, when the Holy Creator then recreates this earth in its perfection, so then His people can be granted with a peaceful place where harmony then rules. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.